Hello, everybody. Welcome back to We're Talking Movies. As always, I'm Andrew, joined by Cade. And today we're reviewing A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge from 1985. Now, for those of you who have been with us for a while, we actually covered the original Nightmare on Elm Street way back in the day. So it's taken us a while to cover the sequel. And as you'll discover over the course of our discussion here, you'll know that's for a reason. But we always like to start with the positive. So let's start with the pros here. And Cade, what are some of your pros for this, the first of what would become many Nightmare on Elm Street sequels?
Well, one pro that I've always had with this movie is the opening sequence when we see Jesse and the two other girls on the school bus being driven by Freddy out into the middle of nowhere. And then we see the ground start to open and we see the bus balancing with the kids inside it. That to me has always been a decent opening. And for a sequel, I think that it's a good way to show that this is going to be a very different movie from the original. I also like how the movie ends in a similar way. When we see Freddy return and we see the bus start driving off into the desert again. I've always liked the idea when movies begin and end in a similar way. So, yeah, the opening sequence of this movie to me has always been a pretty good standout.
Yeah, I really like that. I think it's pretty well done too as an opening. I like how it slowly shifts from, oh, just the kids riding the school bus to, oh, driver, you missed our turn. And then, oh, then things start, gradually falling apart until it goes, full Nightmare on Elm Street with, Freddy driving the bus. And again, the chasm opening up. Pretty good opening. And I do like how they do that again for the closing. I would say not as good of a closing as the original, but still pretty solid. Now, another shared pro that Kay and I both have here is we got to talk about the man of the hour, the man himself. Let's talk about Robert Englund as Freddy.
Absolutely. Freddy has always been one of, if not my favorite villain in horror movies, and Robert Englund is definitely one of the reasons for that. I always love his performance throughout pretty much the whole franchise. He's menacing, he's terrifying, and at times he's actually kind of charismatic in these movies too, which is something kind of unique. And regarding this movie, I think he does a pretty good job for the most part. I don't think he's as good as he was in the first movie, but overall I think he's still good.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it was nice to see Freddy still be a villain in this movie and not a cartoon that he would become in later down the line. I would say probably what about Dream Master is when he really starts becoming more comedic than scary. So it was really nice to still see Freddy just being an absolutely like just nasty, evil bastard of a villain. But it very nearly did not end up like that. Cade, would you like to elaborate our listeners on that?
Sure. So, fun fact for anybody who might not know this, and Andrew, you were actually pretty baffled by this the first time I mentioned it to you. So, originally, the studio New Line Cinema and producer Robert Shea, they didn't even want Robert Englund to come back for this movie. The reason why is because they didn't want to give him a pay raise for returning for the sequel. So, they ended up just hiring a stuntman to play Freddy Krueger. But after just a couple weeks of filming, everyone involved with the film was so unhappy with his performance that they all just changed their minds, worked out a new deal, and they got Robert Englund back for the role. And all I can say is thank God that they did, right?
Oh yeah, as we would learn much later on with the remake. Yeah, only Robert Englund can really ever play Freddy Krueger. Let's be 100% honest. And I don't really know where else to squeeze this in, so we'll talk about this here. This is actually maybe my favorite design of Freddy in the series. I like how like kind of wet and nasty and like almost rotting away he looks in this movie as opposed to the first one. It's almost like I think it kind of adds to his motivations of trying to take over Jesse's body to kill in the real world, like almost maybe like his dream body is like just decaying and falling apart. So he almost needs to return to the real world to continue his killing spree.
Yeah, and talking about another pro regarding some of the other performances in this movie, let's talk about Mark Patton as Jesse. For the most part, I think that he does a good job in the movie. I think he does a really good job portraying Jesse as this socially awkward teenager. I also think he's pretty good when it comes to capturing Jesse's fear. This is not just from his fear of Freddy as a character, but also what he fears Freddy will do to everyone else around him when he's eventually possessing Jesse in the real world.
Yeah, I also think he does a really good job at portraying Jesse as somebody who is slowly losing his mind because people around him clearly don't believe him until they end up being killed off by Freddy. And I think he does a good job portraying that like man who's slowly losing his grip on reality because he knows what's going on. He knows the evil that's in the air, but nobody else around him does. And also credit for him kind of being the first male scream queen because he does quite a bit of that in this movie.
Yeah, he definitely does. Another character and performance that I actually want to highlight is Lisa, played by Kim Myers. Yeah, just like Mark Patton, I think that she does a good job in the movie. I don't think she's that interesting of a character, but I still think she is likable, and I do like how she's able to hold her own against Freddy, specifically during the third act when he takes over Jesse. And I think that the movie does a good job making her and Jesse feel like a team, especially when it comes to them trying to figure out more about Freddy and also how she tries to help Jesse fight back against him when he's possessed.
No, I'll give you that one. Solid chemistry together. I don't think they're as good as other characters we'll see in this franchise, either before or after, but I think she does a solid supporting role as the caring love interest. Before we get into the cons, I do have one more pro I just want to personally bring up, and that is some of the practical effects in this movie are actually quite good. The ones in particular that come to mind are the Freddy bursting out of Jesse's body and the eyeball in the back of his throat kind of thing. Snyder being dragged away and kind of tied up in the shower, and then being sliced and heist down the back. Some of the fire effects are quite well done too, even though the pool scene itself is kind of a mess. But we'll talk about that later. Yeah, no, just some solid practical effects. Some of it doesn't look so great, but the stuff that does looks really good.
Yeah, I'll agree with you on that.
Now let's move into the cons because we've got our fair share because neither of us are terribly huge fans of this movie. And Kay, do you want to kick us off here?
Sure. So my biggest con with this movie has always been the main storyline. That storyline being Freddy possessing Jesse so that he can kill people in the real world. Now, while I do appreciate that this movie did something different from the original, this isn't really different in a good way, in my opinion. The reason why I say that is because for me, it just sort of goes against the whole concept of Freddy. Freddy is the master of dreams. He goes after people in their nightmares, and seeing him go after his victims in the real world and just spending so much time in the real world has just never really sat well with me.
Yeah, that does seem to kind of go against everything that was established in the first movie. And another part of it is there's a very strong, very big issue in this movie of when are they in the dream world and when are they not? Because there's a lot of scenes that they're just like, wait, somebody's supposed to be asleep during this? Like the pool scene. How does that end up happening? Has he taken over? He hadn't really taken over Jesse at that point? Or when he and Lisa are making out in the cabana and the weird tongue comes out of Jesse's mouth. Like, is Jesse supposed to be asleep for this? Because is it ever established that Freddy ever fully takes over Jesse? So yeah, so there's a bit of some faux pas, bit of some plot holes in this movie, and I feel like this could have maybe gone through one or two more rewrites, maybe even three. Let's be honest.
And believe it or not, that's actually one of the reasons why Wes Craven didn't return for this movie. Because he was offered the chance to direct this again. He said no because he didn't like the script or the whole concept of Freddy using a vessel in the real world. He was especially unhappy with the part where Freddy jumps out at the pool party and just starts attacking everyone.
And rightfully so. I would agree with him on that one. Plus, I mean, I get the feeling that Wes would have only returned if he knew that it was going to able to make another quality movie, and this is not a quality movie.
Well, and interestingly enough, one of the original concepts that was actually pitched for this movie was used for A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. That original pitch included Freddy using the dreams of an unborn child. But as it turns out, one of the executives at New Line Cinema, Sarah Risher, who was pregnant at the time, she was actually offended by that concept, so it was rejected, and they ultimately chose not to use it until they were making Elm Street 5.
Interesting. I don't think I had heard that one before. I mean, on paper, and again, we'll get to Dream Child at some point down the road. Interesting concept, but also another interesting concept that was turned into a pretty bad movie, let's be honest.
Yeah, and another big con that I have with this movie would just have to be I don't think that Jesse and Lisa are as memorable of characters as Nancy and Glenn were. Also, Jesse and Lisa's friends, Grady and Carrie, they both don't really have much character or significance in this movie. Coach Schneider is just a strange, abusive gym teacher. Jesse's family, his parents and his sister, almost feel kind of non-existent. Or like how you mentioned once before we did this review, except for the fact that his dad just keeps reminding him to clean his room earlier in the movie.
Yeah, again, not a lot of memorability in this character cast, which is especially sad because the first Nightmare on Elm Street had some great iconic characters. And Wes Craven would prove later on that he can do great characters when he produced the first Scream. So yeah, just not a lot of memorability in this movie, which I think is not a rare opinion to have about this movie because compared to the rest of the Elm Street franchise, I do not hear people talking about this one much. Obviously, the first one, it's like the Dream Warriors because that's a really good one. And then it's how bad some of the later sequels get, how bad the remake is, how meta New Nightmare is.
Yeah, I rarely hear people talking about it. And I think maybe one of the reasons why, and this is just my opinion, but another big con that I have with this movie, and this might be a really unpopular opinion, I have no idea. I've never really found this movie to be all that scary. There are a lot of scenes in this movie that are probably supposed to be scary, but for me, they just come off kind of silly. One example is when the parakeet starts attacking Jesse and his family, and then it just explodes, which was another element of this movie that Wes Craven just found ridiculous. There's also the scene where the lightning strikes the plate, or when Coach Schneider is just getting attacked in his office. To me, there are just a lot of scenes that are probably supposed to be scary, but they've just never been scary to me.
Yeah, because the original Nightmare on Elm Street still holds up really well as being scary. This one, yeah, just not so much. I mean, a couple of all right jump scares, but that's about it.
All right, well, to wrap this up, why don't we move on to our score? So, on a scale of 1 to 10, Andrew, what would you give this movie?
It's kind of a tough one because it's nowhere near the original, but it's certainly not the worst in this series. So I don't know. I feel like a 6 might be a little too generous, but that's what I'm going to give it just because it's not as terrible as what we'll get further down the road.
Yeah, I don't think it's the worst Elm Street movie. It's definitely always been one of my least favorites just because of all the issues I've had with the plot. But I don't know if I would give it a 6, though. I might give it a 5.5. Again, not the worst Elm Street, but definitely not up there with one of my favorites. So I'm going to have to give it a 5.5 out of 10.
All right, everybody. Well, that concludes our review of Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. And with that, I've been Andrew. That's been Cade. Thank you all for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe and follow us on our various socials, and we'll see you all very soon.